In the courtroom, my dad looked proud. The 3 vacation homes in the Florida Keys are ours. The judge read my letter, laughed, and said quietly, "Well, this is interesting." They went completely pale. My family stopped speaking to me when I was 19. No dramatic fight preceded the silence. No screaming match ended with slammed doors. They simply decided I no longer existed, and for 7 years, I built a life without them. The estrangement began during my sophomore year at college. I'd chosen to study environmental science instead of joining the family real estate business. My father called it a waste of potential. My mother said I was throwing away opportunities. My older brother, Cameron, just shook his head like I'd announced plans to live in a cave. They wanted me home every weekend to attend property viewings and networking events. I wanted to finish my degree and work on coastal conservation projects. The compromise they offered wasn't really a compromise, it was surrender dressed up as negotiation. When I refused to drop my marine biology minor, my mother's tone shifted from disappointed to cold. Phone calls became shorter. Holiday invitations arrived later and later until they stopped coming entirely. By my junior year, I was funding everything myself through scholarships, research grants, and a job at the university library. Cameron called once during that period. "You could fix this anytime," he said. "Just admit you were being selfish and come work with Dad." I hung up without responding. Graduation came and went without a single family member in attendance. My roommates' parents took photos with me, treated me to dinner, and told me how proud they were of my achievements. The kindness from strangers hurt worse than the absence of my own blood. I moved to Miami after graduation and found work with a coastal restoration nonprofit. The pay was modest, but the work mattered. I spent my days testing water quality, documenting wildlife populations, and helping design artificial reef systems. My apartment was small, my furniture was second-hand, and I'd never been happier. Years passed. I made friends who became my chosen family. I dated occasionally but never seriously. My career advanced steadily, and eventually I became project manager for our entire Southeast Division. The work took me up and down the Florida coast, from the Panhandle to the Keys. During one project in Marathon, I stayed at a small rental cottage while overseeing a seagrass restoration effort. The property owner, an elderly woman named Constance, mentioned she was selling her 3 vacation homes in the area. She'd owned them for decades but was ready to retire to North Carolina near her daughter. "Beautiful properties," she said, showing me photos over coffee one morning. "Prime locations, all waterfront. I'm pricing them fairly because I want them to go to someone who'll appreciate what the Keys offer, not just some investor who'll flip them." The houses were stunning. 2 were on Islamorada, perched right on the Atlantic with private beach access. The third sat on a canal in Key Largo with a boat dock and sunset views that looked like paintings. Constance was asking $1.8 million total, which was remarkably low for the area. "I've had plenty of offers," she explained. "But most buyers just see dollar signs. They want to tear down and rebuild, turn them into luxury rentals. These homes have history. I'd rather take less money and know they're going to someone who understands their value." The first property, a coral-colored cottage on Islamorada, sat 50 feet from the water. Hurricane shutters framed every window, and the wraparound porch offered views of both sunrise and sunset depending on where you stood. Inside, the kitchen had been updated in the 1990s but maintained its original charm with terrazzo floors and jalousie windows that caught the ocean breeze. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a screen lanai that faced the Atlantic. The second Islamorada house was larger, a 2-story structure with weathered wood siding that had turned silver gray from decades of salt air. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a massive great room with exposed beam ceilings. The previous renters had left it immaculate, and Constance's property manager had maintained it religiously. A path of crushed shells led directly to a private stretch of beach where sea grape trees provided natural shade. The Key Largo property was my favorite from the moment I saw it. Single story, painted a soft yellow that glowed golden during sunrise. The canal location meant protection from the worst storms while still offering incredible water access. The boat dock could accommodate vessels up to 30 feet, and the backyard featured a tiki hut where previous guests had carved their names into the support beams, a tradition Constance said dated back 20 years. Each property had its own personality, its own quirks. The Coral Cottage's master bedroom had a window seat perfect for reading. The two-story house had a widow's walk on the roof where you could see for miles on clear days. The yellow house had an outdoor shower surrounded by palm fronds where you could rinse off after diving. Constance walked me through maintenance schedules, introduced me to reliable contractors, and shared decades of wisdom about managing vacation rentals in the Keys. She explained which months brought the most tourists, which local regulations I'd need to follow, and which insurance policies were essential for hurricane protection. These houses have survived Andrew, Irma, and every tropical storm in between, she said while we stood in the yellow house's kitchen. They're built solid. But you need to respect the ocean. Board up when warnings come. Keep the trees trimmed. Check the pilings on the dock every season. The Keys will reward you if you take care of them properly. I absorbed everything she said, taking detailed notes and asking questions about property taxes, rental management companies, and seasonal pricing strategies. My background in environmental science gave me a deep appreciation for the delicate ecosystem surrounding these homes. I understood erosion patterns, reef health, and the importance of native landscaping in preventing coastal damage. You really do care, Constance observed during one of our conversations. Most buyers ask about rental income projections and nothing else. You're asking about seawall maintenance and native plant species. These properties sit on one of the most beautiful and fragile coastlines in the country, I replied. I'd be honored to own them, but only if I can be a responsible steward. That conversation seemed to seal her decision to accept my offer despite having higher bids from other buyers. Something about her words resonated deeply. I'd spent years protecting coastal ecosystems from overdevelopment. These properties represented exactly the kind of thoughtful, sustainable use of natural resources I believed in. I didn't have $1.8 million. I had about $40,000 in savings and a decent credit score. But I'd learned over the years that impossible problems sometimes have creative solutions. Over the next month, I put together the most unconventional real estate deal of my life. I found two conservation-minded investors who wanted vacation properties but also cared about environmental stewardship. We formed a small LLC with me as majority owner. I convinced my bank to extend a commercial loan based on projected rental income. I cashed out my retirement account and liquidated every asset I owned. The numbers barely worked. I'd be house poor for years, living on rice and beans while building equity. But I could do it. Constance accepted our offer. The closing took place on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. When I signed the final documents, I owned 51% of 3 gorgeous vacation homes in the Florida Keys. My investors owned the rest and managed the rental operations. I drew a small monthly stipend from the profits and maintained approval rights over any major decisions. The first few months of ownership tested every skill I developed over the years. A summer storm damaged shingles on the 2-story house, requiring emergency repairs. The yellow house's air conditioning system failed during peak season, and I spent an entire weekend coordinating with contractors while apologizing to disappointed renters. The Coral Cottage needed new hurricane shutters before the next season, a $12,000 expense I hadn't budgeted for. But there were victories too. A family from Ohio rented the 2-story house for an entire month and left a glowing review about the pristine beach access and thoughtful amenities. A couple celebrating their 50th anniversary stayed in the yellow house and sent me a handwritten thank you note with photos of the sunset they'd watched from the dock. Revenue exceeded projections during the winter high season, allowing me to build an emergency repair fund. I visited the properties every few months, combining inspections with my coastal restoration work. The Keys became a second home in ways I hadn't anticipated. I knew which restaurants in Isla Morada served the best conch fritters. I became friends with a hardware store owner in Key Largo who could source any repair part within 24 hours. I learned to read weather patterns and predict when storms would threaten the islands. My investors, both environmental engineers who shared my conservation values, proved to be ideal partners. We agreed on sustainable practices like low-flow fixtures, native landscaping, and reef-safe sunscreen requirements for guests. We implemented a strict no-anchoring policy near seagrass beds and provided mooring balls for boats. The properties became models for responsible ecotourism, generating income while protecting the ecosystem. During this period, I never once contacted my family. I didn't send updates about my success or seek validation for my achievements. The silence they'd created remained unbroken, and I'd grown comfortable in the space it provided. My life was full without them: meaningful work, good friends, properties I was proud to own and maintain. Looking back, I realized those 2 years of quiet success made what came next even more jarring. I'd proven everything I needed to prove, at least to myself. I'd built equity, established a reputation, and created something sustainable and valuable. The properties weren't just investments, they represented a version of myself my family had insisted couldn't exist. I didn't tell anyone about the purchase beyond my business partners and lawyer. It felt too personal, too precious to announce casually. These homes represented everything I'd built without my family's money or approval. 2 years after buying the properties, I received an unexpected phone call. My cousin Jessica, whom I'd been close with before the estrangement, had tracked down my number. "Your dad is sick," she said without preamble. "Lung cancer. Advanced. He's been in treatment for 6 months." The news hit harder than I expected. Whatever anger I carried hadn't erased the fact that he was still my father. I asked if he wanted to see me. "That's complicated," Jessica admitted. "Your mom is being protective. She doesn't think reaching out to you would be good for his stress levels." The irony was staggering. 7 years of silence, and somehow I was still the problem. "He's been settling his affairs," Jessica continued. "Making arrangements. I thought you should know." After we hung up, I sat in my car for an hour, processing. Part of me wanted to drive to their house and demand to see him. Part of me wanted to maintain the distance they'd created. I did neither. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and let myself cry for the relationship we'd never had. 3 months later, my father passed away. Jessica called again to tell me. The funeral was private, family only. I wasn't invited. I sent flowers anonymously and spent the day of his funeral diving off Key Largo, trying to find peace among the coral and fish. Death has a way of crystallizing regret, and I regretted that we'd wasted so much time on stubbornness and pride. A month after the funeral, I received a formal letter from an attorney I didn't recognize. My father's estate was entering probate, and apparently I was named in the will. The reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. The letter itself was brief and professional, but it raised immediate questions. Why would my father include me after 7 years of complete estrangement? We hadn't spoken since my junior year of college. He hadn't acknowledged my graduation, my career, or any milestone in my adult life. The last conversation we had ended with him telling me I'd come crawling back once I realized how hard the real world was. I called Jessica to ask if she knew anything about the will. "Mom's been tight-lipped about everything," she admitted. "But I heard her tell Cameron that your dad wanted to set things right before he died. Whatever that means. Setting things right could mean anything from a token gesture to a genuine attempt at reconciliation." I tried not to hope for too much. Death had a way of inspiring last-minute guilt that rarely translated into meaningful change. The days leading up to the will reading felt surreal. I continued my normal routine: work, exercise, errands, while a parallel version of myself obsessed over every possible scenario. Maybe he'd left me a small amount of money with conditions attached. Maybe the will contained an apology I'd never received while he was alive. Maybe it was nothing at all, just a formality of including all children regardless of relationship status. I changed outfits 3 times on Tuesday morning, uncertain what to wear to face people who treated me like I didn't exist. Professional seemed safest: dark slacks, a blouse, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look successful without appearing like I was trying too hard. The drive to the attorney's office took 30 minutes through downtown traffic. I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in my car, gathering courage. Through the building's glass doors, I could see an elegant lobby with marble floors and a security desk. This was my father's world: expensive, exclusive, designed to intimidate. I walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. I almost didn't go. What could he possibly have left me beyond another rejection? But curiosity won out over caution. The attorney's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building I'd never entered. Everything looked expensive: the furniture, the art, the view. I arrived early and waited in a conference room with leather chairs and a table that could seat 20. My mother arrived exactly on time, followed by Cameron and his wife, Adrienne. They looked through me like I was furniture. My mother wore black, which seemed performative since the funeral had been weeks ago. Cameron wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The attorney, Mr. Gaines, was professional and efficient. He read through the preliminaries, taxes, debts, specific bequests to various charities and friends. Then he got to the family distributions. Cameron received the family business, as expected. Adrienne got my grandmother's jewelry collection. My mother retained the primary residence and a substantial financial portfolio. Then Mr. Gaines paused, shuffling papers. And to my daughter, Vanessa, I leave my 3 vacation properties located in the Florida Keys, specifically the homes on Isla Mirada and Key Largo, which have provided our family with years of enjoyment and investment value. The room went silent. My mother's face transformed from neutral to confused. What properties in the Keys? Mr. Gaines looked uncomfortable. The 3 vacation homes. They're listed here in the deed records. He slid papers across the table. Cameron leaned forward, scanning the documents. His expression shifted from puzzlement to anger. These addresses. Dad never owned properties at these addresses. Something clicked in my brain. I pulled out my phone and opened the document folder where I kept all my real estate information. The addresses on Mr. Gaines' papers matched my properties exactly. May I see those? I asked quietly. Mr. Gaines passed the papers to me. According to the documents, my father had purchased 3 vacation homes in the Florida Keys 15 years ago. The deeds showed his name clearly. The tax records confirmed ownership. Everything looked legitimate. Except it wasn't. I'd bought these properties 2 years ago from Constance, who'd owned them for 30 years before that. There's been a mistake, I said carefully. These properties don't belong to my father's estate. I own them. My mother's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Don't be ridiculous. You're barely scraping by in that nonprofit job. How would you own multi-million-dollar vacation homes? Cameron's expression was smug. This is embarrassing. Just accept what you've been given and stop trying to cause drama. I placed my phone on the table, documents visible. I purchased these 3 properties 2 years ago from the previous owner. I have closing documents, title insurance, and current mortgage statements. They're registered to an LLC that I majority own. Mr. Gaines reached for my phone, then hesitated. May I? I nodded. He examined my documents carefully, comparing them to the papers from my father's estate. His face grew increasingly troubled. This is highly irregular, he said finally. Mr. Wallace, could you explain how you came to possess these deeds? Cameron's confidence faltered slightly. They were in Dad's safe deposit box, along with his other property records. And you verified ownership before including them in the estate inventory? I verified that they were in his possession, Cameron said defensively. Why would he have deeds to properties he didn't own? Why indeed? I thought about my father, his real estate empire, his absolute certainty that I'd failed by choosing a different path. An ugly possibility emerged. May I ask when these deeds were supposedly filed? I directed the question to Mr. Gaines. He checked the documents again. According to these records, the transfer of ownership was recorded 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Right around the time my father was settling his affairs. Right around the time he knew he was dying. My mother's voice was ice. Are you suggesting your father forged documents? I'm suggesting someone did. I kept my tone level despite the anger building in my chest. Because I have legal ownership of these properties, and I can prove it. Adrienne spoke for the first time. Maybe you forged documents. You've been estranged for years. Maybe this is some kind of revenge scheme. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. I bought these properties through a legitimate real estate transaction with multiple witnesses, bank loans, and title insurance. Everything went through proper legal channels. Anyone who tried to claim ownership now would need to prove how they acquired properties that I demonstrably own. Mr. Gaines cleared his throat. I think we need to pause this reading. These competing ownership claims need to be resolved before we can proceed with distribution. I recommend. We're not pausing anything, my mother interrupted. Those properties belong to this estate. Whatever documents she's manufactured, I didn't manufacture anything. The words came out sharper than I intended. I worked for 7 years to build a life you all dismissed as worthless. I saved money, found investors, and made a legitimate purchase. I own those homes. Your assumption that I couldn't possibly achieve something without family money says everything about why we haven't spoken in years. Cameron stood abruptly. You don't get to lecture us about family. You walked away. I chose a different career. You all decided that made me dead to you. You chose to throw away every advantage we offered. I chose to build something myself. The room felt like it might explode from the accumulated tension. Mr. Gaines looked deeply uncomfortable, caught between professional obligations and a family conflict spiraling beyond his control. Adrienne had gone pale, clearly unprepared for this level of confrontation. My mother's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. You've always been selfish. Even as a child, you thought rules didn't apply to you. Your father tried to guide you toward success, and you threw it in his face. Now you show up here with fabricated paperwork, trying to steal from your own family's estate. The accusation was so fundamentally unfair that I felt something break inside me. 7 years of silence. 7 years of building a life without their support or acknowledgement. And still, they couldn't imagine I'd succeeded on my own merits. I have bank statements showing loan payments, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I have testimony from the woman who sold me the properties. I have title insurance, inspection reports, and 2 years of tax returns showing rental income. What do you have besides deeds that mysteriously appeared in Dad's safe deposit box months after I purchased these properties? Cameron's face flushed red. Are you calling Dad a criminal? I'm saying someone forged documents. Whether it was Dad or someone acting on his behalf, those deeds are fake. My ownership is real. That's not an opinion, it's a fact that can be verified by any attorney or title company. Enough. Mr. Gaines raised his hands again, more forcefully this time. This discussion is going nowhere productive. I'm formally suspending this reading until the property ownership question is resolved. Ms. Wallace, I recommend you retain legal counsel immediately. Mr. Wallace, I suggest you do the same. We'll reconvene once we have clarity on these competing claims. My mother stood, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. This is unconscionable. We're grieving, and she shows up with lies and forgeries to complicate everything. I want her investigated. I want the police involved. Feel free to call them, I replied calmly, though my hands were shaking. I welcome any investigation into my property purchase. I have nothing to hide. Can you say the same about those deeds? She didn't answer, just turned and walked out. Cameron and Adrienne followed, but Cameron paused at the door. You know what Dad said about you? His voice was quiet but vicious. He said cutting you off was the hardest thing he ever did, but necessary. He said you had to learn that actions have consequences. Looks like you still haven't learned. He left before I could respond. The door closed with a definitive click, and I was alone with Mr. Gaines in the suddenly too quiet conference room. I apologize, he said after a moment. I should have verified those deeds more carefully before including them in the estate inventory. This is highly irregular. Can I ask you something honestly? I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Did my father seem like someone who would forge legal documents? Mr. Gaines chose his words carefully. Your father was a complicated man. He built an empire through aggressive business practices and unwavering confidence in his own judgment. Toward the end, when he knew time was running out, he became focused on legacy. What he'd leave behind, how he'd be remembered. He wanted to feel like he'd resolved unfinished business. So yes, you think he did this? I think he was capable of many things when motivated by strong emotions. Whether he actually commissioned these forgeries, I genuinely don't know. But I will help you get to the truth. Mr. Gaines raised his hands. Please. This isn't productive. I'm going to need time to investigate these ownership claims. In the meantime, I strongly suggest everyone retain separate legal counsel. The meeting dissolved into hostile silence. My mother and Cameron left without another word. Adrienne gave me a look of pure contempt before following. I remained seated, trying to process what had just happened. My father had somehow obtained fraudulent deeds to my properties and planned to give them to me through his will. As if he'd owned them all along. As if my achievement was actually his generosity. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Even in death, he couldn't acknowledge that I'd succeeded without him. Mr. Gaines approached carefully. Ms. Wallace, I apologize for this situation. I had no idea there were questions about ownership. Can I ask you something? I met his eyes. Did my father ever mention me during your meetings? He hesitated, bound by attorney-client privilege but perhaps moved by my obvious distress. He spoke about wanting to bridge certain gaps. Leave things in better condition than he found them. By stealing credit for my accomplishments? I don't think he saw it that way. But I'm beginning to understand this situation is more complex than the documents suggested. I hired a lawyer that afternoon. Tessa Brennan specialized in real estate fraud and came highly recommended. She reviewed my documents with meticulous attention, then examined copies of the fraudulent deeds Mr. Gaines had provided. "This is actually pretty sophisticated," she said, almost admiringly. "Someone paid good money for these forgeries. The paperwork looks legitimate at first glance. But there are inconsistencies in the filing dates and notary signatures. And of course, you have an ironclad chain of title proving your ownership. So what happens now? We file a formal challenge to the estate's claim. We provide documentation of your purchase and ownership. We demonstrate that these deeds are fraudulent. The court will rule in your favor because the evidence is overwhelming. Then we decide whether to pursue criminal charges for the forgery. Against my dead father? Against whoever created these documents. If your father commissioned them, obviously he's beyond prosecution. But if someone in the family knew they were fraudulent and tried to proceed with the inheritance anyway. She left the implication hanging. The legal process moved slowly. My lawyer filed motions. The estate's attorney filed counter motions. Depositions were scheduled. I provided bank statements, loan documents, title insurance policies, and testimony from Constance, who confirmed selling me the properties 2 years ago. Cameron and my mother provided nothing concrete beyond the fraudulent deeds and outraged insistence that I was lying. Their attorney seemed increasingly uncomfortable as evidence mounted against their claim. 4 months after the initial will reading, we ended up in court. Not a trial exactly, more of a hearing to resolve the ownership dispute before the estate could be settled. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. My mother sat with Cameron and their attorney at one table. I sat with Tessa at another. Mr. Gaines attended as a neutral party representing the estate itself. The judge, an older woman named Judge Patricia Caldwell, reviewed the submitted documents with obvious care. She asked pointed questions about the timeline of events, the chain of custody for the fraudulent deeds, and the verification process Cameron's attorney had conducted. Then she asked to see me privately in chambers. Tessa accompanied me, and the opposing attorney came as well, but the judge wanted to speak directly to me. "Ms. Wallace," she began once we were seated. "I've reviewed your documentation extensively. Your ownership of these properties appears legitimate and well documented. But I'd like to understand something about your intent here." I waited, uncertain where this was going. "You could pursue criminal charges for this forgery. You could sue for damages, emotional distress, legal fees. You could make this very expensive and very public for your family. Is that your goal?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about my father, dead and beyond consequences. I thought about my mother and Cameron, convinced of their own righteousness even while presenting fraudulent documents. "I just want what's mine," I said finally. "I bought those properties with money I earned and loans I'm still paying off. They represent years of work and sacrifice. I'm not trying to humiliate anyone or extract revenge. I just want the court to confirm that they belong to me, so we can all move forward." Judge Caldwell studied me for a long moment. "That's remarkably gracious, given the circumstances. Have you considered why your father might have created these documents?" "I've thought about little else for 4 months. And?" I chose my words carefully. I think he couldn't accept that I built something valuable without his help. Creating those deeds let him pretend my success was actually his gift. It was delusional and hurtful, but I understand the impulse. He spent my entire childhood telling me I'd fail without family support. Admitting I'd succeeded would mean admitting he was wrong. "And your mother and brother? Do you think they knew the deeds were fraudulent?" "I honestly don't know. They've always assumed I was struggling and resentful. Maybe they saw what they expected to see, their father being generous to his wayward daughter. Maybe they never questioned it because it fit their narrative about me." The judge made a note. "Thank you for your candor. Let's return to the courtroom. Back at the tables, Judge Caldwell resumed her position on the bench. She looked at the attorneys, then at my family, then at me. I've reviewed all submitted evidence regarding the 3 vacation properties in the Florida Keys. Ms. Vanessa Wallace has provided comprehensive documentation of her purchase and ownership of these properties, including closing documents, title insurance, mortgage statements, and witness testimony from the previous owner. This documentation is thorough, consistent, and legally valid. My mother's expression remained stony, but I saw Cameron shift uncomfortably. In contrast, the judge continued, the deeds presented by the estate are highly problematic. The filing dates are inconsistent with county records. The notary signatures don't match verified samples. The chain of title shows no legitimate transfer from the actual previous owner to the decedent. In short, these deeds are fraudulent. The word hung in the air like smoke. I am ruling that Ms. Vanessa Wallace is the legitimate and sole owner of the properties in question, and they are not part of her father's estate. They should be immediately removed from the estate inventory and will not be distributed through probate. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt dizzy. However, Judge Caldwell's voice sharpened. I want to address the broader situation here. Someone commissioned forgeries of legal documents. That's a serious crime. Whether the decedent arranged this himself or someone acted on his behalf, the creation and attempted use of fraudulent deeds constitutes real estate fraud. She looked directly at my mother and Cameron. If I find evidence that anyone knowingly presented fraudulent documents to claim property that wasn't theirs, I won't hesitate to refer this case for criminal prosecution. Am I clear? Their attorney mumbled something affirmative. Ms. Wallace, the judge turned to me, do you wish to pursue charges? Every eye in the courtroom fixed on me. I thought about everything these people had put me through, the years of silence, the dismissal of my achievements, the assumption that I was nothing without them. I thought about the forgeries, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that they deserved what I'd built. Then I thought about my father, dying and desperate to rewrite history. I thought about Constance and her beautiful homes. I thought about the life I'd built, the career I loved, the friends who'd become family. Revenge would feel good for about 5 minutes. Then I'd spend years mired in criminal proceedings, reliving this pain over and over. No, I said clearly. I don't want to pursue charges. I just want to move on with my life. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. Before she could respond, my mother stood abruptly. You self-righteous little, she caught herself, visibly struggling for control. You think you're better than us because you scraped together enough money to buy some beach shacks? You've always been arrogant, always thought you were smarter than everyone else. Mrs. Wallace, Judge Caldwell's voice was sharp. Sit down. My mother ignored her. He loved you. Your father loved you, and you threw it away for some meaningless job testing water. Then you have the audacity to stand there and act like you're being gracious by not pressing charges? We didn't do anything wrong. Those properties should have been yours through inheritance, not because you. Sit down now, or I'll hold you in contempt. The judge's tone left no room for argument. My mother sat, but her face remained flushed with rage. Cameron put a hand on her arm, whether to comfort or restrain, I couldn't tell. Judge Caldwell waited until the room settled. I'm going to say something off the record here, though it will remain in the transcript. Mrs. Wallace, your daughter has shown remarkable restraint and maturity throughout this process. She built something meaningful with her own resources and abilities. Rather than celebrating that achievement, your family attempted to claim it as your late husband's generosity. That's not love. That's control. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but the judge raised a hand. Your daughter is offering you a gift by not pursuing criminal charges. I suggest you accept it quietly and with whatever grace you can muster. Because if I see any evidence that you continue to harass her or make false claims about property ownership, I will revisit the question of prosecution myself. Understood? Silence. I'll take that as a yes. This hearing is concluded. The properties remain with Ms. Vanessa Wallace. Case closed. The gavel came down with a decisive crack. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high and my ownership secure. Tessa congratulated me on the steps outside, pleased with the outcome and already planning to send a formal cease and desist letter to prevent future harassment. My mother and Cameron left without speaking to me. Their attorney looked relieved to be done with the whole mess. Mr. Gaines approached carefully and extended his hand. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you handled this with tremendous dignity. Your father would have been proud, whether he could admit it or not." I shook his hand but didn't respond. I wasn't sure my father would have been proud. But I was proud of myself, and after 7 years of building a life without their approval, that was enough. 3 weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, but the postmark was local. Inside was a short letter written in my father's handwriting, clearly composed before his death. "Vanessa, if you're reading this, you've discovered what I tried to do with the properties. I know you'll be angry. You have every right to be. But I wanted to explain, even though I won't be around to defend myself. I never believed you'd actually succeed on your own. A few months before my diagnosis, I happened to see a photo in a local real estate newsletter, one of your properties being featured as an eco-friendly vacation rental. I recognized your name on the LLC paperwork. The shock of realizing you'd accomplished something so substantial without any family help shook everything I'd told myself about your choices. For weeks, I wrestled with it. When the cancer diagnosis came and I knew time was running out, I couldn't accept that I'd been wrong about you for all those years. So I created a fiction where I'd owned them all along and was simply returning them to you. It was foolish and wrong. But it let me die believing I'd made peace with you, even if it wasn't real. I'm sorry for many things. Mostly, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you I was proud before it was too late. You built something remarkable. I just wish I'd been able to see it sooner. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away with my other important documents. It didn't change anything, but it provided a kind of closure I hadn't expected to receive. My life continued much as before. I still worked in coastal conservation. I still managed my properties through the LLC. I still lived modestly and saved carefully. The difference was internal. I'd proven to myself and everyone else that I could build something valuable on my own terms. Jessica called occasionally to catch up. She'd sided with me during the legal battle and paid for it with family tension, but she seemed at peace with her choice. We met for coffee sometimes and talked about neutral topics, carefully avoiding the minefield of family drama. One afternoon about 6 months after the court hearing, I drove down to Isla Mirada to check on the properties. The rental manager had reported some minor maintenance issues, and I wanted to inspect them personally. The houses looked beautiful in the late afternoon sun, exactly as they had when Constance first showed me the photos. I walked through each one, checking repairs and making notes. Then I sat on the deck of the smaller Isla Mirada property and watched the ocean. I thought about my father's letter, his inability to accept my choices, his deathbed manipulation. I thought about my mother's rage in the courtroom and Cameron's smug assumption that I couldn't possibly have earned anything myself. Then I thought about Tessa's sharp legal mind, Jessica's loyalty, Constance's trust in selling me these beautiful homes, and Judge Caldwell's fierce protection of justice. I'd lost the family I was born into, but I'd gained something more valuable, proof that I could stand on my own. The vacation homes weren't just real estate investments. They were evidence of my resilience, my capabilities, and my refusal to let anyone else define my worth. The sun set over the Atlantic in shades of orange and gold. I locked up the house, climbed into my car, and drove back to Miami. Tomorrow I had water samples to analyze and a grant proposal to finish. The properties in the Florida Keys were mine, legally and unquestionably. More importantly, the life I built was mine too. And unlike the family who'd tried to claim credit for my achievements, I'd earned every single piece of it.